The night Emma went into labor was marked by a violent storm, as if nature was in tune with what was about to happen. Beside her bed, Liam, her husband, was restless, his nerves frayed, but he tried to stay strong. The couple had waited years for this moment, and now the arrival of the twins seemed both a blessing and a trial by fire. However, as soon as Emma gave birth, an eerie silence took over the room, interrupted only by the baby's cries. The joy Liam expected to feel soon turned to shock. The twins, although born from the same womb, were remarkably different. One of them had fair skin like his mother, while the other had dark skin, a deep contrast. The midwife, as she lifted the newborns, hesitated for a moment. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. The mystery was planted in the hearts of everyone present, but there was no time for explanations. Emma, exhausted and weak, took one last breath, and her body relaxed in a way Liam would never forget. She was gone, and he was left alone, devastated, with his 2 children in his arms. The loss of Emma was an unbearable blow for Liam, who found himself plunged into a spiral of grief and confusion. The difference between the children became a shadow in a moment that should have been one of pure joy. As he tried to deal with his grief, the mystery of the twins' birth began to take root in his mind and those around him. The small town where they lived soon became involved in gossip, and rumors began to circulate. Could it be possible that the twins had different fathers? The question seemed to echo everywhere. News of Emma's death and unusual birth quickly spread. Many of the neighbors offered condolences, but Liam felt the weight of the judgmental looks. It was not only the tragedy of the loss that tormented him, but also the malicious insinuations about the boy's paternity. Even though he was shaken, he knew that there was something deeper happening there, something that transcended the simple explanations that people offered. Over time, the anguish gave way to a silent determination. He would discover the truth. However, the truth seemed distant and shrouded in mystery. As she watched her children sleep side by side in their cribs, the contrast between them was undeniable. But there was also an inexplicable connection. It was as if the twins shared a bond beyond blood, something Liam didn't yet understand. As the days passed, he began to notice little strange things. The fair-skinned son, who he named Noah, was serene and peaceful. The dark-skinned one, who was named Isaac, seemed restless, as if he was always looking for something. As the weeks passed, Liam began to hear old stories that had been buried in time. The city where they lived, although small and peaceful, carried deep secrets. Some of the older ones began to whisper about an ancient legend, a story about 2 brothers who were born in ancient times, one of them light-skinned and the other dark-skinned. The story told of a curse, or perhaps a blessing in disguise, that linked the destinies of the 2 brothers in a tragic way. Could it be possible that her children were connected to something so ancient and mysterious? Liam, overcome by curiosity and anguish, decided to investigate the legend of the 2 brothers further. He began visiting the city's elders, those who still remembered the ancient stories passed down from generation to generation. It was a story that younger people no longer took seriously, but that older people treated with respect and fear. According to legend, many centuries ago, 2 brothers were born to the same mother, but to different fathers. One of the brothers inherited the light, and the other, the shadows. Legend said that these brothers were destined for a tragic fate. The light-skinned brother was seen as blessed, while the dark-skinned one carried the weight of an ancient curse. Because of this duality, the 2 never found peace. Their lives were marked by conflicts, both internal and external, until, in the end, a sacrifice was necessary to break the cycle of pain. Liam, initially skeptical, began to see disturbing parallels between the legend and his own situation with his children. As the days passed, Noah and Isaac's behaviors seemed to mirror the old story. Noah was a sweet child, always smiling and playing without worries. He attracted people around him, as if his presence brought comfort and peace. Isaac, on the other hand, had a different energy. Even though he was just a baby, there was an intensity in his eyes, as if he was already carrying the weight of something greater than his short existence. These differences began to create a silent tension in the house. Searching for answers, Liam remembered a woman known for her wisdom and connection to the spiritual. Her name was Miriam, a healer who lived on the outskirts of the city, far from the modern world. It was said that she knew ancient secrets, and many turned to her in moments of despair. Although reluctant, Liam decided to look for her, believing that perhaps she could help solve the mystery surrounding the twins. When he finally found her, Miriam looked at him with an air of recognition, as if she already knew why he was there. Miriam revealed to Liam that the brothers' legend was more than a story to scare children. It was an ancient truth. She explained that in times past, children were born who carried a cosmic duality, one representing light and the other shadows. These children, linked by a common destiny, always had to face challenges that surpassed human understanding. The tragedy, according to Miriam, was how the world around them reacted to these children, as the fear of the unknown generated suffering. Liam was perplexed. He didn't know how to deal with the fact that his children could be at the center of something so ancient and enigmatic. However, Miriam warned him that it was not the duality itself that would bring pain, but how he would choose to deal with it. He had the chance to change his children's fate, but to do so, he would need to accept the truth and embrace both the light and the shadows. As the years passed, Noah and Isaac began to grow up, each manifesting personality traits that reflected their physical differences. From a very early age, Noah exuded a deep calm, always smiling and serene. The townspeople were naturally drawn to his presence, and he soon became everyone's favorite. Her fair skin and golden hair reinforced an angelic image that made even strangers stop and admire. He seemed to bring peace wherever he went, and even the farm animals approached him with confidence. The community began to see him as a blessed child, a perfect reflection of purity. Isaac, on the other hand, grew up surrounded by a different aura. His dark skin and intense gaze caused ambiguous reactions. To those who didn't know him closely, he seemed mysterious, even threatening. Although he was as kind-hearted as his brother, there was a restlessness in his movements, an intensity that people could not understand. Isaac was curious, always questioning the world around him, and although he was equally loving towards his father, he was viewed differently by the community. Many whispered about him, as if there was something they couldn't explain. There were those who said he carried a shadow within him. Over time, this difference in treatment began to affect the boys. Liam, although he tried his best to be fair, couldn't help but notice how the world seemed to view his children in such different ways. Noah, with his almost otherworldly brilliance, was celebrated, while Isaac was often shunned. Liam began to notice a painful pattern. When they walked together through the city, people smiled at Noah, praised his beauty, but looked away from Isaac. Even though they were still children, the difference in treatment was palpable, and this created a growing divide between the brothers. Isaac, despite being young, was beginning to understand these distinctions. He saw how people looked at him and his brother differently, and it began to fuel a silent pain inside him. He loved Noah deeply, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of exclusion. Liam, always attentive, tried to compensate for what he saw happening, offering love and affection to the two boys, but he knew that the impact of the community was beyond his control. And deep down, Liam himself wondered if the legend of the two brothers was coming true right before his eyes. Noah, in turn, was innocent of the favoritism he received. He loved Isaac unconditionally and didn't understand why people treated them differently. To him, Isaac was his brother and best friend. But as they grew, Noah began to feel the weight of expectations from those around him. People said he was special, that he had a light inside him, something destined for a great purpose. This invisible burden began to weigh on his shoulders, and he, still so young, found himself torn between the love he felt for his brother and the external pressure that surrounded him. Liam, distressed, constantly searched for ways to protect his children from this destructive dynamic. He took them for long walks in the hills around the city, taught them about nature, about mutual respect and brotherly love. However, the world around him seemed to run its course, indifferent to his efforts. Increasingly, Isaac withdrew, spending hours alone exploring the fields and forests around the house, while Noah was constantly invited to community events. Liam feared that this division would become irreversible. Despite everything, there were times when the brothers were together, and in those moments, the unbreakable bond they shared was still present. On cold nights, when the wind blew hard, Noah and Isaac would snuggle together by the fireplace, listening to the stories Liam told about his mother, Emma. It was in these moments of intimacy that differences disappeared, and they were just two brothers who loved each other deeply. However, Liam knew that this would not be enough to avoid the conflict that was to come. The legend of the ancient brothers seemed to cast an ever longer shadow over their lives. Liam wondered if he could stop the legend's tragic fate from repeating itself, but he felt that the weight of past generations was already beginning to influence the present. He needed to act, but he still didn't know how to protect his children from this cycle that seemed to repeat itself relentlessly. With adolescence, the differences between Noah and Isaac, which were previously more subtle, began to manifest themselves in a disturbing way. The first event that caught Liam's attention occurred one afternoon while he was working in the field. The sky was clear, and the sun was shining brightly. Noah, as usual, played near the farm, his presence radiating a peaceful energy. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept past him, making the leaves of the trees dance, but without disturbing the calm around him. It was as if nature enveloped him in a bubble of serenity, protecting him from any disturbance. On the other hand, Isaac, who was far away near the forest, seemed to attract an opposite energy. As Noah was enveloped by sunlight, dark clouds began to quickly form over Isaac. The wind, which was just a breeze around Noah, turned into a strong and stormy current where Isaac was. Liam watched, perplexed, as the division between the two brothers seemed to materialize in the very environment around them. It was as if nature responded in different ways to each person's presence, reflecting what he had feared for years. Something supernatural was happening. The situation intensified when the phenomena began to occur more frequently. One night, during a particularly violent storm, lightning struck very close to the house. Noah was on the porch, watching the rain with fascination, when a flash of light exploded in the sky. In an instant, everything turned white, and the lightning seemed to hit the ground right next to him. However, when the glow stopped, Liam ran to check on his son, and, to his surprise, Noah was unharmed, standing in the same place, as if nothing had happened. It was as if nature itself protected him. Isaac, however, was in his room when the lightning struck. After the incident, Liam ran to him and found Isaac's room shrouded in strange gloom, even with the lights on. Isaac was sitting on the floor, staring at a flickering candle, the fire almost going out. The boy seemed restless, as if he felt a connection to the storm outside. "I felt it, Dad," Isaac said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "The lightning. It was like it was coming at me, but it deflected." This moment marked a definitive change in Isaac's life. He began to isolate himself even more, feeling that there was something inside him that separated him from others. Meanwhile, the townspeople began to notice the strangeness surrounding the twins. Comments and rumors circulated faster and faster. There were those who said that Noah was a living miracle, a true angel sent to protect the community. Others, more superstitious, began to avoid Isaac. For them, the boy brought a dark energy, and some mothers even pulled their children away when he approached. These reactions only deepened Isaac's loneliness, as he already felt out of place in a world that didn't seem to accept him. Liam, increasingly desperate, once again sought help from Miriam, the healer, in the hope of better understanding what was happening. Upon arriving at his cabin, he told everything he had witnessed. Miriam listened attentively and, after a long silence, spoke. "The forces that surround your children are beyond human understanding. One is a keeper of the light, and the other of the shadows. But the shadows are not evil, Liam. They are part of the balance. The key is how you guide them, so that they both learn to embrace their destinies without fear." His words, while profound, didn't bring the relief Liam had hoped for. In the following months, Noah and Isaac began to develop abilities that went beyond the norm. Noah, in moments of tension, seemed to be able to calm not only the people around him, but even the animals. Once, a wild horse, which always resisted being ridden, allowed Noah to pet it and then mount it without resistance. It was as if the boy had a natural gift for controlling peace wherever he went. People saw this as a miracle, further reinforcing the idea that Noah was some sort of divine envoy. Isaac, in turn, discovered that he could manipulate darkness in inexplicable ways. One day, while alone in his room, he noticed that the shadows on the wall seemed to respond to his thoughts. He reached out his hand, and to his surprise, the shadow of his own hand lengthened impossibly, as if it had a life of its own. Startled, Isaac backed away, but he knew something inside him was revealing itself, something he couldn't completely control. This power, however, only isolated him even more, as he knew people would never understand. These events began to weigh on Liam's soul, as he found himself powerless in the face of what his children were becoming. He feared that the brothers' legend was playing out exactly as described, with light and shadow moving towards an inevitable destiny. However, the deepest doubt that gnawed at him was, how could he protect them both? And would it be possible that one of them would have to sacrifice something or someone for the balance to be maintained? The weight of the mystery surrounding his children became unbearable for Liam. With each passing day, he found himself more immersed in doubts and worries. Noah and Isaac's behavior seemed to grow further and further apart, as if the invisible line connecting the brothers was about to break. Desperate for answers and believing that the legend could not be the only explanation, Liam began to investigate the history of his own family and that of Emma, his late wife. He knew there was something deeper at play, something that went beyond the city's stories. Liam began by going through Emma's old belongings, which had remained untouched since her death. He had never had the strength to deal with that pain. But now, in search of answers, he believed that perhaps she had left something behind that could help him understand what was happening. Among old letters and diaries, one in particular caught his attention. It was a letter written by Emma during her pregnancy, intended for him but never delivered. The paper was yellowed, but the words, written in delicate handwriting, conveyed a painful truth. In the letter, Emma reported a secret she had kept for years. During her youth, she had traveled to a remote region where she became involved with an ancient community that practiced ancient spiritual rituals. Apparently, this community believed in forces that governed the balance between light and shadow, and Emma, without fully understanding it, had become part of one of these rituals. She mentioned a pact made by her ancestors with ancient forces, and that this pact was linked to the birth of children with dual destinies. Emma didn't know the exact details, but she feared that this spiritual past was influencing her twins. Liam was stunned by the discovery. Emma had never mentioned any of this while she was alive, and now he was beginning to understand that the birth of the twins was not a fluke. There was something in Emma's lineage that was tied to what Noah and Isaac were experiencing. But what shook him most was the mention of an entity called the Shadow Guardian, which, according to Emma, could be awakened by the birth of a child with a special connection to darkness. Was it possible that Isaac was this heir, the bearer of an ancient curse or perhaps an ancestral responsibility? Determined to find out more, Liam sought out the last person alive who might know something about this past. Emma's mother, Clara. Liam's relationship with Clara had always been distant. She was a private woman and, since her daughter's death, had practically isolated herself. However, upon hearing the desperation in Liam's voice, she agreed to see him. When Liam arrived at Clara's house, he found her aged, but with her eyes still filled with dark wisdom. When talking about the letter, Clara confirmed her suspicions. Clara revealed that, for generations, her family had kept ancient secrets about light and shadow rituals. According to her, Emma's twins were the culmination of centuries of prophecies that spoke of the ultimate balance between these two forces. "Our family carries the blood of ancient guardians," said Clara, in a deep voice. "The twins are different, Liam. They're not just ordinary kids. Noah is the bringer of light just like his ancestors, but Isaac carries something deeper. He's not cursed, but he's destined to face the darkness within. And out of your mind." Clara also mentioned an ancient family heirloom, an artifact passed down from generation to generation, which had the power to protect heirs from the forces that threatened them. It was an amulet, hidden since Emma's youth, that Clara believed could help balance the powers the twins carried. The amulet, which contained intertwined symbols of light and shadow, had been sealed in a safe in the family home many years ago. Clara begged Liam to find the amulet and give it to Isaac and Noah, believing that only then could they control their abilities without destroying themselves. After this revelation, Liam returned home with his mind in turmoil. The complexity of the situation overwhelmed him, but he knew he couldn't ignore Emma's past any longer. He needed to act. He searched every corner of the house, trying to find the safe mentioned by Clara. And, after hours of searching, he finally found a small, rusty metal box hidden in the attic. Inside it, there was the amulet, exactly as Clara had described it. An ancient piece, made of silver, with an intricate design of lights and shadows intertwining in harmony. As he held the amulet in his hands, Liam felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that this object carried an ancient power, and that, in some way, it could be the key to saving his children from the tragic fate that seemed to be approaching. But now the question arose. How would he explain all this to Noah and Isaac? How could I help them accept who they were destined to be? More than that, would they be able to deal with the forces that were awakening within themselves? After discovering the amulet and confronting the truth about Emma's past, Liam knew he could no longer hide the reality from his children. Noah and Isaac were growing up, and their powers, once just subtle manifestations, were becoming more evident and dangerous. The weight of the mystery and differences between them was already visible in the looks they exchanged, in the growing distance that silently separated the brothers. The time had come to reveal what he had discovered about his legacy, even if it could bring even more conflict. One cold night, in front of the fireplace that heated the house, Liam called the twins. Noah's eyes shone with their usual softness, while Isaac, sitting further away, watched with a more introspective, almost suspicious expression. Liam felt the weight of his words before he even started, but he knew there was no going back. He placed the amulet on the table, his fingers touching the cold metal reverently. "There is something you need to know, something that will change the way you understand who you are," he began, his voice shaking slightly. Liam then told the whole story: the ancestral pact made by Emma's family, the ritual involving light and shadows, and how Noah and Isaac represented the forces in balance. Noah, always optimistic, seemed fascinated with the idea of carrying the light, of being a guardian of good, as his father described it. But Isaac reacted differently. Upon hearing about the shadows he carried, his gaze turned dark, his fists clenched. He had long ago felt that something inside him didn't fit in with the world around him, but being told he was the shadow bearer only reinforced his feeling of exclusion. "So, am I the problem?" Isaac asked, his voice full of pain and bitterness. Liam tried to calm him down, explaining that shadows weren't bad, that they were a vital part of balance, just like light. "There is no light without shadow, Isaac. You are not a curse, you are part of something bigger," he said, but Isaac didn't look convinced. For years, he had endured the suspicious looks, the silent gossip, and now, it all materialized into a truth he didn't want to accept. For him, Noah was the chosen one, the favorite, while he was the weight that kept the scales on the dark side. Noah, in turn, tried to comfort his brother, but his attempt only made the situation worse. "Isaac, this doesn't change anything between us. We're brothers, we're in this together," he said, placing a hand on Isaac's shoulder. But Isaac, overcome by accumulated frustration, abruptly walked away. "Together? How can we be together if you've always been the favorite? You don't understand what it's like to carry the weight of darkness, Noah," he shouted, his voice choked with anger and pain. Liam saw, at that moment, the division between the brothers deepening dangerously. After the confrontation, Isaac got up and ran out of the house, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Liam tried to go after him, but Noah stopped him, saying it was better to give his brother time to process everything. "He needs space, Dad. Forcing him now will only make things worse," Noah said, with the quiet wisdom that characterized him. Still, Liam was worried. Isaac was increasingly distant, and with his powers awakening, he feared what would happen if the boy gave himself over completely to the darkness. The hours passed slowly that night. Noah remained by his father's side, while Liam tried to think of a way to repair their children's relationship and help them understand the true purpose of the amulet. Clara had said that he would be the key to balancing the forces, but Liam still didn't know how. Doubt gnawed at him, and he knew time was running out. Isaac needed help, but how to guide him without him feeling like he was being compared to his brother? As Isaac wandered through the forest, far from the house, dark thoughts crossed his mind. He remembered every moment he was left aside, how people treated him, and now all of this seemed to have a painful explanation. The shadows he felt inside him seemed to grow, fueled by anger and frustration. The trees around him seemed darker, and the wind that blew in his face brought a feeling of restlessness. He didn't know where to go, but he felt like he needed to get away from everything and everyone. As he walked, Isaac noticed something unusual ahead. A faint light flickered between the trees, as if calling to him. Instinctively, he approached. As he got closer, he saw that it was a small clearing, and in the center of it, an ancient stone with carved symbols. He didn't know how, but he felt that there was something special about that place, as if the forces that guided him had taken him there. Isaac, without realizing it, was about to connect with something much older and more powerful than he could have imagined. Inside the house, Liam and Noah waited tensely for Isaac's return, not knowing that that night would be just the beginning of a much bigger conflict. The shadows and the light, now personified in the two brothers, were about to collide in a way that would change their lives forever. In the dimly lit clearing, Isaac felt a vibrant energy pulsing in the air. The shadows around him seemed alive, dancing in response to his presence. The symbol carved into the stone vaguely resembled the amulet Liam had shown earlier, but here, in the heart of the forest, the connection seemed much more intense. Isaac slowly approached the stone, his breathing heavy, his heart racing. Upon touching its cold surface, a wave of energy coursed through his body, as if the shadows he had carried for so long had finally found a point of convergence. Immediately, he was struck by a vision. In his mind, ancient and distorted images began to form, visions of ancient warriors, of rituals involving light and darkness, and of a prophecy that spoke of balance between forces. Isaac saw, in flashes, versions of himself and Noah, not as simple brothers, but as centerpieces in an eternal battle between light and shadow. He was the heir of the shadows, not by curse, but by purpose. The darkness within him, which he had always considered a burden, was actually a vital force for the balance of the world. The revelation shook him deeply. For a moment, Isaac felt a powerful wave of acceptance. He wasn't the problem as he had feared. On the contrary, it was necessary. But along with this understanding, a new doubt arose. What did this mean for Noah? The vision showed that harmony would only be achieved through a painful choice. Someone would have to sacrifice something for the balance to be maintained. The idea terrified him, but now there was no going back. The connection with the shadows had already been awakened, and the fate was sealed. Meanwhile, at home, Noah felt something strange. It was as if a part of his own energy was being drained. He couldn't explain it, but he knew it had to do with Isaac. He stood up abruptly, telling his father that he needed to find his brother. Liam reluctantly agreed to accompany him. The two left in a hurry, following Noah's instinct. As they walked through the forest, the presence of a dark energy became more and more palpable. To Noah, it was as if something was calling Isaac, and he feared what might happen. When they finally reached the clearing, Noah saw Isaac standing before the ancient stone, shrouded in shadows that seemed to swirl around him like a living storm. Liam, alarmed, tried to get closer, but Noah stopped him. "Dad, wait. I need to talk to him alone," he said, his voice full of calm but also urgency. Liam hesitantly agreed, watching with a heavy heart as Noah advanced towards his brother. The contrast between the two was clear. While Isaac was shrouded in darkness, Noah seemed to shine with an inner light, a strength that he himself barely understood. Isaac looked up as Noah approached, and for a moment, both brothers were silent. "I understand what's happening to you," Noah said, his voice soft. "I feel it too. The forces that surround us, they don't need to tear us apart." Isaac, with tears in his eyes, shook his head. "But they've already separated us, Noah. It's always been that way. You're the light and I'm just the shadow. We can't exist together without one of us losing something." Noah, eyes full of compassion, replied, "I don't believe that. Light and shadow need each other. There is no balance without both." The dialogue between the brothers was full of emotion. Isaac, still enveloped by shadow energy, wanted to believe Noah's words, but the visions he had received spoke of a cruel fate. "What if one of us has to sacrifice something, Noah? I've seen it. Balance demands a price." Noah, determined, reached out to his brother. "If there is a price to pay, we will pay it together. No force will divide us. We are stronger together than apart." Isaac hesitated, but deep down he knew Noah was right. The shadows around Isaac began to slowly dissipate, responding to his brother's call. The moment Isaac touched Noah's hand, the storm of darkness ceased, and the clearing was filled with a soft light, almost like dawn after a long night. The balance at that moment had been restored, but both knew that the real challenge was yet to come. After that night in the clearing, something changed within the brothers. Although they had experienced a moment of understanding and balance, they both knew that peace was temporary. The connection that united them had been strengthened, but the weight of the opposing forces they carried still persisted. The following days were strangely silent, as if the surrounding nature itself was waiting for the next confrontation, something greater than they imagined. Isaac, now more aware of his role, began training in secret. He didn't want to be consumed by the shadows, but he also knew he needed to dominate them so they wouldn't dominate him. He spent hours in the forest, trying to control the energies that emanated from him. He could feel the darkness flowing like a powerful river within his body, and at times it was frightening. In one of these solitary sessions, he felt the presence of something greater, an external force, as if the very shadows of the world were gathering around him. It was a warning that the real enemy was not Noah, but something that came from outside. Meanwhile, Noah, unlike Isaac, seemed to have difficulty understanding his own light. He had always been seen as the blessed one, but he had never understood what that really meant. Now, more than ever, he knew that his strength was not just a blessing, but a responsibility. The glow that emanated from him attracted people, but it also attracted forces that sought to destroy him. Noah began to feel the pressure growing on his shoulders. He needed to be more than the brother who brought peace. He needed to be the protector of something much bigger. Liam, watching his children closely, could tell something was afoot. The relationship between them had changed, but the danger seemed greater than ever. He turned to Miriam again, desperate for guidance. She, with a tired look, explained that the balance between light and shadows was a constant battle. What the brothers were facing was not just a family or emotional issue, but a spiritual one. "There is a greater force approaching," said Miriam, in a deep voice. "The shadows that surround Isaac are being drawn by an entity that wishes to disrupt the balance. And Noah, with his light, is the only one capable of confronting it. But they will need to fight together, or they will be destroyed apart." It was at that moment that Liam understood the gravity of what was coming. His children weren't just fighting each other or against themselves. They were centerpieces in a much larger battle, something that was being driven by cosmic forces beyond their understanding. Liam knew he couldn't protect them alone. They would have to face this war, but he would be by their side until the end. That same night, a series of inexplicable events began to happen in the city. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, even at midday, and a sense of unease permeated the air. People began to murmur that something dark was about to happen. The city lights flickered, and some animals began to act strangely, as if they sensed a presence that no one else could see. Isaac, feeling guilty, began to believe that he was responsible for this, that the dark forces he carried were attracting this mysterious entity. Noah, noticing his brother's growing fear, tried to convince him that it wasn't his fault. "We're both part of this, Isaac," "You can't face this alone. I can't face this alone. We need to fight together," Noah said with determination. For the first time, Isaac couldn't resist his brother's words. He knew Noah was right, but the darkness inside him continued to whisper that sacrifice was inevitable. In the distance, a storm was beginning to form. This was no ordinary storm. The skies were darker than usual, and the wind carried with it a deep echo, as if an invisible force was approaching. Noah and Isaac prepared themselves, knowing that the final confrontation was near. The shadows and the light were on a collision course, but this time it wasn't just between the brothers. There was something bigger, a battle that would transcend their own lives, and they would need to be united to survive. The storm approaching the city was unlike any other. Dark clouds swirled in the sky with an almost supernatural intensity, and the air was charged with a dense energy that was difficult to breathe. Noah and Isaac knew that the final battle was at the door. It was the shadow entity, the force that Miriam had mentioned, and it was coming to destroy the balance. Both brothers, now more aware of their roles, knew they would need to face this together, or they would not survive. Liam, filled with fear, couldn't shake the feeling that his children were about to face something much bigger than themselves. The clearing where Isaac had felt the call of the shadows became the meeting place between the opposing forces. The entity emerged from the darkness of the forest, not with a defined shape, but as a presence shrouded in shadows that constantly changed shape. The creature's every movement seemed to drain the light from its surroundings, creating a suffocating darkness. Isaac felt the shadows inside him pulse, as if they were attracted to the entity. It was a call he feared answering, but he knew he would have to face it. Noah, at her side, glowed faintly, his presence offering a calm amidst the chaos. The battle began without words, just pure energy clashing. The shadow entity advanced, trying to dominate Isaac, seeking to merge with him, while Noah used all his strength to keep the light on. The shadows around Isaac began to revolve around him, as if they wanted to consume him. He felt the power of the entity pulling him, but this time he didn't run away. Instead of resisting, he began to control the shadows, to manipulate them in a way he had never done before. It was as if he had finally understood that the darkness within him was not something to be feared, but to be understood. Noah, in turn, fought with a light that became stronger and stronger. He knew he couldn't defeat the entity alone, but he also knew that union with Isaac was the key. "Isaac, don't let the darkness control you. We can do this together," Noah shouted, trying to break the oppressive silence of the battle. Isaac heard his brother's words and, for the first time, he didn't feel anger or fear. He reached out, not to drive away the shadows, but to control them. When he did this, the entity hesitated. It was as if Isaac had taken away a part of his power, and the shadow creature weakened. With the entity momentarily vulnerable, Noah concentrated all of his light, releasing a bright beam that cut through the air like a sword. The beam hit the entity directly, but instead of destroying it, it began to envelop it, blending in with the shadows. Isaac, sensing the moment of unity, used the shadows around him to complete the circle. Light and darkness intertwined, and the entity, trapped in the middle, began to lose its shape. The vortex of light and shadow swirled around the creature, which roared in fury but was unable to break free. Noah and Isaac's combined effort began to suffocate the entity, which, weakened, began to dissipate. It was not a complete destruction, but a return to balance. The entity disappeared, being pulled back into the shadows of the forest where it belonged. The air, once heavy and oppressive, was now light, and the silence that took over the clearing was almost sacred. Noah and Isaac fell to their knees, exhausted but victorious. Together, they had managed to face the biggest test of their lives. Liam, who was watching everything from a distance, ran to his children, his eyes full of tears. He knew something profound had changed between them. The battle between light and shadows, which for so long had threatened to separate them, now united them in an indestructible way. Although the immediate threat had been defeated, Liam knew that the balance between light and shadow was a constant battle, and that his children would always need to maintain this unity so that the world around them would not be consumed by the forces they faced that night. The end of the battle brought with it a new understanding for the brothers. Isaac, for the first time in his life, didn't feel like the shadows were a burden, but a vital part of who he was. Noah, ever the protector, understood that his light only existed in fullness when balanced with Isaac's darkness. They were not opposites destined to destroy each other, but essential complements to each other. After the final confrontation in the clearing, Noah and Isaac's lives changed profoundly. The return to normality was marked by a feeling of relief, but also by a greater awareness of what had happened. The forces that once threatened to separate them were now the reason for their union. They understood that their existences were interdependent. Without Isaac, the shadows would not have been controlled. Without Noah, the light would not have triumphed. The city, however, did not know the details of the battle, but everyone felt that something had changed. The strange oppression that hung in the air had disappeared, and tranquility seemed to have finally returned. Noah, who had always carried the burden of being the blessed one, now understood that his light was only meaningful when shared with Isaac. He was no longer the lone savior everyone imagined him to be, but part of a pair of complementary forces. Over time, Noah learned to better channel his light, not as a weapon, but as a source of peace and balance. He continued to be the anchor of the community, but now with a deeper understanding that the light could not fully exist without the shadows. Isaac, in turn, stopped fearing the shadows within him. He understood that his role in the world was not to be the darkness that everyone avoided, but rather the strength needed to maintain balance. He used his abilities consciously, controlling the shadows without being dominated by them. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel inferior or excluded. Her relationship with Noah had transformed from rivalry to partnership, and this change was reflected in her self-confidence. Isaac came to see himself not as a threat, but as a guardian of darkness, one who maintains balance on the side of light. Liam, watching his children grow, felt immense pride. He, who had so often feared the worst, now saw the importance of allowing them both to find their own paths. Although he still carried the pain of losing Emma, he knew that her legacy was alive in Noah and Isaac. Emma had always known that her children would be special, and now, Liam saw clearly why. The balance between light and shadow was not something to be feared, but something to be understood and respected. As time passed, the brothers found a unique harmony. Although their personal paths were different, they always returned to each other when balance needed to be restored. They learned to act together, each respecting the other's role. Noah continued to be the presence of light, bringing hope and clarity to those around him. Isaac, with his control of the shadows, became the one who deals with the secrets and mysteries that the light cannot reach. The amulet that Liam had found, now in Isaac's possession, became a symbol of this union. He used the artifact as a constant reminder that light and shadow are not opposites destined for destruction, but forces that, together, keep the world in harmony. Miriam, who had guided them throughout their journey, visited them occasionally, offering advice when needed, but always with the wisdom of someone who knew the balance was finally secure. Still, Noah and Isaac knew that the battle between light and shadow was eternal. Although they defeated the entity that night, they understood that other threats could arise, and that their role as guardians of that balance would never end. With every step they took, they both felt that their destiny was linked to something greater, but now, they were ready to face any challenge that the future brought. And, above all, they knew that, together, they were unbeatable. In the years that followed, Noah and Isaac became living legends in the community. People saw them as brothers who, despite their differences, maintained balance in everything they did. The story of twins with light and dark skin, born from the same womb, but with such different destinies, spread, becoming a tale of inspiration and courage. In the end, what Noah and Isaac had learned was what everyone should understand. Light and shadow are not enemies. They are, in fact, inseparable parts of the same force, necessary to maintain balance in all things.